Now that we've covered some of the basics on standard framing materials, let's talk a little bit about framing specific to the kind of surface or paint. We'll begin with works on paper or flat artwork. The standard framing for works on paper, or generally flat works of art, is usually a matte backing board, a thin frame, and glazing, the sandwich that we talked about. But there are many variations on this. Most experts recommend using a mat for these pieces of art, with the exception of a very large piece, or for triptychs, which often look better without a mat. In these cases, you would use spacers to bridge the gap between the artwork and the glazing. Paintings on paper are a little more vulnerable to the elements because paper is especially vulnerable to moisture as well as dust and damage. For this reason, glazing of some kind is usually necessary. Believe it or not, there are ways to frame certain works on paper or flat art without glass or acrylic, and it's gaining popularity. If your work is in watercolor, gouache, or acrylic, some kind of water media like that, there are special varnishes that are specifically made for these paints. They're normally in the form of a spray varnish so that you don't reactivate the paint when you apply it. This is not really a problem for acrylic, of course. There are also special waxes. One is Renaissance wax that produces a water-resistant protective layer, and if you wipe it on gently, it does not seem to reactivate the paint. The protected work can then be mounted onto a prepared solid surface, an archival panel perhaps, and then framed like an oil painting. Alternatively, if the panel or board is appropriate, you can even hang the protected water media painting without a frame, or use a floater frame. A floater frame is, as we mentioned, a type of frame that gives the impression that the work is floating within the frame boundary. Many works on paper or flat artwork use a metal or a thin wood frame. This is something you'll probably notice when you go to an exhibition. But your choice of frame really depends on the painting image itself. Some paintings are gentle and fluid, while others are painted in a kind of a heavy and direct way. A heavier looking image, perhaps boldly painted, can often handle a larger frame. Painting size also plays into frame size. I find that I can get away with a 2-inch wood frame for certain watercolor pieces, and perhaps even 3 inches, but probably not 4. At that point, it starts to outweigh the picture and command too much attention. It starts to look imbalanced, so be on the lookout for that. Watercolors tend to appear more delicate by their very nature when compared to an oil painting, so they often require simpler framing. There are a wide variety of options when it comes to framing a watercolor. If you research or visit an art museum, you may get some other ideas. As far as acrylics, one thing to remember about acrylic paintings is that once they're fully cured, the dried paint is softer than dried oil paint, making it slightly more vulnerable to dirt and damage. So glazing might be a smart option. That said, because you cannot reactivate the paint once it's dry, framing without glazing, like an oil painting, is also a viable option. Now, dry mediums, such as graphite, Conte crayon, or silver point, can be vulnerable to smearing. So unless you spray it with an appropriate fixative, and maybe even after that, it's probably best to frame them with glazing. If you're framing a pastel, a charcoal drawing, or some other kind of medium that has loose particles, UV filtering glass is recommended because acrylic sheet tends to have a static charge and it could cause some of the small loose particles of color to adhere to the glazing. Now, what about works of art on canvas or panel? Well, paintings on stretched canvas or panel don't really need matte or glazing. They're most often placed directly into the frame and secured in place. Now, as we mentioned, they can use a liner if you feel it would look better with a thin border around the painting, but there's not usually glazing. For works on canvas, conservators recommend placing archival backing board on the back. This helps protect the painting from puncture, dirt, bugs, and even fluctuations in temperature and humidity. I provide a link to a conservation guide that can walk you through the process of attaching one if you're interested. As far as oil paintings shouldn't have a glazing for at least the first few years, because the surface will need to breathe as it cures. So it's really just a matter of selecting the proper frame size and style for the piece. Oil paintings are visually more substantial due to the nature of the paint, so they can normally handle most wooden frames, and they can often take on a wider frame as well, within reason. You'll need to somewhat match the frame depth with the canvas or panel depth. Just be aware. Now, if you work in egg tempera, that medium should be protected from moisture. So even though they're almost always painted on a solid surface, such as panel or board, they should use glazing. They should probably even have the sides and the back of the surface painted with latex house paint to prevent moisture. In the next lecture, we'll talk about preparing your framed painting for hanging.